We are told that around 10,000 years ago, humanity woke up from a slumber and the age of science and discovery began. Thus, man was now in charge of his destiny, no longer at the whims of nature. Man understood how to manipulate his environment. That is when man decided to leave the natural environment to create an artificial one called a city. In the city, man is the master. Man oversees everything. Man oversees the food. Man oversees the light. Man oversees the means of transport. This artificial environment can also be said to be the reason why the Bible begins with the Garden of Eden. This is because when man left the natural environment, aka the Garden of Eden, and created an artificial one where man builds his civilization, it means that leaving the natural environment is the same as leaving the presence of God to live in the presence of man. When we die or when the world comes to an end, we are told that we will go to a city in the sky. The Christians call this sky city heaven. If you believe in the constant technological progress of the current world order, then in the future, man will climb aboard spaceships and travel to the moon or Mars and continue living in a space city where he will continue doing the same things that he does here on earth, like going to malls, restaurants, and movie theaters. This is the story of how man has turned the city into his God. He does everything for the glory of his city.
Creation of man's first cities, chapter number 1.
Around 7,000 years ago, man decided to leave the dark continent. Man suddenly became enlightened from the darkness and discovered that he could suddenly stop his primitive hunter and gatherer life and become a super farmer, and thus was able to settle in Egypt, which is said to be the first civilization of man. Man was only able to do so because of the annual flooding from the river Nile and was guaranteed of a steady supply of water for irrigation and his basic needs. As a result, the history of mankind experienced the most important revolution since he became conscious, the Neolithic Revolution. In Egypt, man developed his cities for over 3,000 years. The Egyptians, after living in these cities for over 3 millennia, lost their memories about their past lives as hunter and gatherers and only remember their lives as Egyptians. They thus created gods that suited the new lives as people who depended on the Nile for the flooding and adapted those new gods to the new city lifestyle. The first god that the Egyptians created was a god associated with the flooding of the Nile. This god was called Osiris. The Egyptians understood that without the annual flooding, their crops would fail and therefore they would starve. That is why a god like Osiris had to be created so that the said god could sustain the flooding of the river each year. The Egyptians created another god associated with funeral rites. This god was called Anubis. This god was created due to the high death rate caused by living in these Egyptian cities. This was as a result of living in close quarters while also modifying the environment to such a high degree that disease outbreaks became a common occurrence. For example, mosquitoes which cause malaria were common due to the numerous open pools of stagnant water in these cities. As a consequence of this high mortality rate, a death industry was created. The funeral rites industry assured the relatives of the deceased patron that their loved one is going to a better Egypt, where there are no diseases or any of the bad things that are usually associated with those Egyptian cities. The flooding of the Nile also necessitated the tracking of time, since it was of paramount importance to know when the flooding is going to happen so that all the Egyptian farmers were ready for planting. The Egyptians therefore had to develop their own calendar for tracking of important events. This calendar also necessitated the creation of writing, since the language of the time could only track the lunar cycle. It also necessitated the keeping of records so that all the people of Egypt knew when to plant or harvest. Writing was also created so that the rulers of Egypt can control the large population of Egypt. It was no longer possible to create a cohesive society using only word of mouth. Writing enabled non-living things like the tombs of pharaohs and the walls of a temple to speak to the populace. And since they needed a simple way to communicate easily with their subjects, they created a writing system that took inspiration from the environment. That is why Egyptian hieroglyphs have symbols to represent letters and words directly inspired from the environment. As usual, the Egyptians had to create another god for this new technology. The god of writing was called Thoth. This god could be represented either as an ibis or a baboon. So, the Egyptians kept inventing or creating new gods as they were being changed by their cities. They changed so much that they forgot where they came from. They became consumed by their cities to the point of believing that Egypt is the only place that exists. Their way of living was the only right way because it was ordained by their gods. This pattern of locating cities next to a major river was basically repeated on all major cities around the ancient world. For example, there are several cities which some are wholly located on the river Ganga, which is a major river flowing through the country of India. When you move on to China, the river Yangtze also has created quite a few major cities next to China's mightiest river. There are also many ancient cities located near rivers. Some well-known examples include Babylon near the Euphrates River and Rome near the Tiber River. In conclusion, the Egyptian cities created the basic blueprint for the rest of the world. Currently, there are 35 major cities around the world located next to rivers.
Land for the City, chapter number 2.
In the previous section, we have established that one of the major requirements for a city is a primary source of water. The next thing that is required is lots of suitable land. The land preferably should be flat and away from hills and valleys. This is due to the planning required for the city becomes more complicated by uneven land, and also the labor requirements for the construction of the city will be increased. Once man has established the location of the city, the next thing man did was to clear the land for the city. If the city location is nearby a forested area or an area that is similar to the Garden of Eden, the first thing man did was to clear the land of all the grass, bushes, trees, and also chase out any animals that had made the forest their home. Basically, any type of flora or fauna that was present in that area had to be killed or removed. Once man has finished clearing the area, the next thing is to level the ground. That will enable the construction of stone structures on top of the earth, while also preventing nature to re-establish itself. As the city continues to grow, more and more land is needed for the city. As the industries associated with it also need more land. The more the population of the city grows, more land will be needed to house the workers of the city. This cycle continues until we have sacrificed the whole natural environment to the service of the God of the city.
Infrastructure for the City, chapter number 3.
After man has established the location of the city, the next thing man did was to establish monuments or specially designed structures that will attract people to his city. In addition, man will attempt to beautify the city by planting his own exotic flowers and trees to improve the overall look of the city. Man will do this by attempting to copy some aspects of nature like flowering trees and beautiful bushes. These flowers and trees will be planted near important monuments. So, whatever the populace will see is as a result of the design of man. The more people you have in your city, the richer the city is. The easiest way to do this is to build a tall and beautiful monument that is visible to the natives from all around. This kind of monuments serve as a kind of mind magnet for the people around so that they are attracted to the newly constructed city like moths to a lamp. They forget who they are and their mind is taken over by the design of man. The technique of building these monuments that act as a mind magnet has been done since the days of the Egyptian cities. For example, the design of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, France, and the pyramids has exactly the same design, and all serve the same purpose. When tourists visit the country of Egypt, the first thing these tourists usually do is to visit the pyramids. Similarly, when tourists go to Paris, France, the first monument they usually want to see is the Eiffel Tower. Back at home, whenever visitors come to the city of Nairobi for the first time, the most important monument to see is the Kenyatta International Conference Center, or the KICC building, which is still among the tallest buildings in Nairobi. That is the power of monuments. They become some sort of structures to be worshipped by the minds of man that pay a homage to them.
Worshipping of God in the Cities, chapter number 4.
We have seen that once you have established the infrastructure, the monuments will attract all kinds of people to the city. This is because the city will require labor to maintain it. The city can only be maintained by people who are familiar with the ways of the city. So, the first thing man did was to train the immigrants so that they can survive and thrive in a new artificial environment. The easiest way to train the new settlers of the city is to introduce them to a new religion of the city. For example, in ancient Egypt, the Egyptians had built many temples for each of their many gods. These temples enabled worshippers to be consumed by the grandness of the structure for the believers to be awed into submission. The worship structures therefore spared no expense when they were being built. They were monuments of grandiosity from pillar to pillar, full of inscriptions from wall to wall. This was the first contact point for the immigrants with the new religion and culture that they had to adopt so they can survive in the new artificial environment. Under these temples, they were trained in the teachings of the gods so that they became good laborers to the maintenance of the city. There was also a select group of special laborers. These people were chosen by the people, or they were chosen by their respective gods to be their representatives here on earth. These classes of people were the priests of the temple. Each temple therefore had their worship priests, oracles, servants that helped interpret the signs so that the worshippers understood what the gods needed of them. Fast forward to the early 20th century, when the Mzungu missionary came to Dogoto in central Kenya. The first thing the Mzungu did was to find a Mugumo shrine used by the elders for their sacrifices to Mwene Nyaga. The Mzungu then proceeded to cut down that Mugumo tree and then proceeded to put up a worship structure in its place. Inside the church, the Mzungu had managed to create very compelling propaganda on the stained glass windows, which awed our earlier ancestors into accepting Christianity, which is equivalent to Western culture. This church is still standing in Dogoto, Kikuyu. In addition, the missionary, aka the colonizer, used the church as the first contact point with civilization. The next contact point the missionary created was to build a school. The missionaries encouraged their new Christian converts to take their children to school, so that they can be taught the ways of the colonizer and become the new laborers to the maintenance of the city. The church and the school was like a factory of the mind, where you start with the church as the first assembly station and leave the next assembly station, which is the school, as a black European. The cycle continues until they have enough people converted and taught the ways of the colonizer that it becomes self-sustaining. In conclusion, once you have managed to replace their god and their worship procedure, it becomes easier to teach them the new culture that is required for the maintenance and glory of the city.
Transport and labor to the cities, chapter number 5.
As we have shown in the previous chapter, to create and maintain these cities requires a lot of labor. A critical component of sustaining a city is to ensure that you have adequate transport infrastructure, mainly to transport labor and the materials required to sustain the city. However, sometimes when man was creating his city, he was not able to find adequate labor in the surrounding areas, or sometimes due to the many diseases man carried, he ended up killing the local population. Man therefore had to ship in immigrants from his other colonies so that he can use that labor to build and sustain the new city. This is the primary reason why the Mzungu came and built the railway line between Mombasa and Kampala, Uganda, to create a connection between these two cities. This also enabled easier transport of new settlers from every corner of man's empire to come and settle in the new colony. The railway line also enables the transportation of much needed cargo that will be used to build the monuments that were required to take over the minds of nearby natives so that they can be converted to the new civilization that was now cropping up in the new city of Nairobi. The Mzungu also hurriedly built the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, which was then called Embakasi Airport, during the emergency period from 1953 to 1958, using the slave labor of the Mau Mau detainees to ensure that the connection to other cities is maintained. The Mzungu was very desperate to have the airport operational so that he can maintain his grip to his soon-to-be former colony. Once man has created the transport infrastructure, it is then much easier to attract even more people. These people will attract other special people like traders and merchants. The excess people who are uneducated in the art of city living or do not have a connection to the ruling class will serve as the main labor force for man's city. They will do the less desirable jobs that have to be done to sustain the city, like clearing rubbish and maintaining the sewage lines. That is why all the slums in Nairobi are located near the rivers. This is because the less desirable people of the city were not considered in the expansion of the city. The easiest way for them to come and settle in the city was to settle near a river where they can have access to water for their basic needs, as the colonialist did not take them into consideration when he was building his water infrastructure for his wealthier city residents. There were some instances where this labor must be obtained by whatever means necessary, even if it is by force of slavery. This is because when the Mzungu suddenly discovered a new world which was said to be inhabited by savages in the so-called American continent, the Mzungu realized that there was a huge amount of land that can be utilized to produce sugar and cotton for use at his European home. At the same time, the Mzungu had developed his ocean infrastructure and was now able to navigate around the Atlantic Ocean trading his goods and services. He therefore decided to borrow the idea of slavery from the Arabs, who had been practicing it for hundreds of years. Since he also wanted to produce and ship the goods from America and still sell them for a profit in Europe, the idea of slavery became even more compelling, and the morality of the whole exercise was thrown out of the window for the god of the city. Therefore, for 400 years, the Mzungu decided to transport people from one continent to the other so that he can have cheap sugar for his tea. The slave trade continued until they achieved the Industrial Revolution, and therefore the need for vast amounts of labor was reduced as some agricultural tasks became mechanized. The Mzungu then decided that he can become a hero by banning the same trade that he had been part of for hundreds of years. This means that without the Industrial Revolution, the slave trade would never have ended.
Communication in the cities, chapter number 6.
Once you have the people in the city, you need to have propaganda to control the populace from causing problems in your city. As we have seen in the previous section, one of the best ways is to use religion as the primary propaganda and then create secondary propaganda that will align the populace with the vision of the god of the city. From the days of the Egyptian cities, writing as a form of communication has been critical for the mass control of people. It ensures that the information that the ruling class needs to be broadcast is disseminated to all classes of the society. As the city size expands, a more sophisticated communication system will be needed. This is because the early cities were limited in size by the communication infrastructure. For example, if a ruler needs to send an edict to a specific point in the city, the ruler had to either send a runner or a horse rider to deliver that edict. Another way that the city is able to control the population is by standardizing value. This standardization of value, which we now understand as money, is the primary way the ruling class distributes value to the masses. This ensures conflict is reduced because the price is set before any transaction so that the populace vision of money is clearly understood. The third arm of population control is advertisements. Any modern city cannot survive without inducing consumption of the populace. This has been done since the first cities in Egypt. The pharaoh was a god on earth, so all the populace had to follow what the pharaoh did. The subjects would always want to mimic what the pharaoh was doing. This created a never-ending cycle of consumption. In the modern era, this has been perfected by the modern advertisement industry, where everything is literally for sale, telling people day in, day out that if you get that product or that service, your life problems will vanish in thin air. This is the cycle of temptation that we go through in the modern age of the city, where everybody is a seller of something. We are sold something from the time we are born to the time we die without really getting anything of value spiritually.
Energy to run the city, chapter number 7.
To run a city requires a lot of energy. The more modern the city, the more energy it needs. If the city is in the northern hemisphere, then the energy requirements are also increased significantly. When man started living in cities, his primary method of generating energy was not sophisticated at all. Basically, he continued using firewood as a source of energy until the Industrial Revolution came along. The need to live in these cities has also created a demand for energy. The human power has a limit to what it can achieve and therefore limits the pace of building and expansion of man's city. In the era of the Industrial Revolution, these rivers next to cities then transformed into sources of energy. Man was able to create huge hydroelectric dams that provided both water for use in the city and also electrical energy that could run all types of machinery, especially those in the factory. Apart from this energy running the factories, the energy is used to provide power for radio transmission equipment for mass broadcast of propaganda to keep the populace civil. The portable fire energy that man developed during the Industrial Revolution has been the single largest contributor to the destruction of the natural environment. The scale of expansion of cities around the world over the last 100 years would not have been possible without this portable fire energy. Man has gone all around the world looking for this liquid to provide the energy required to mainly run his portable machinery like automobiles, trains, ships, and other industrial equipment. Man has said that the emissions from this portable equipment that runs on dead liquid that is pumped from deep within the Earth's crust will likely cause global warming and possibly irreversibly damage the climate of the planet Earth, potentially making it a living hell like our neighboring planet Venus. Yet, with all the fire and brimstone preaching from the governments around the world about this danger, they still continue to use copious amounts of the dead liquid to make our city lives comfortable. This is because we have to serve the energy god of the city no matter what, even if it might end up destroying our living home, planet Earth. Due to the above danger posed by burning the dead liquid to create energy, the Mzungu is desperately looking for another energy god to replace the current liquid fire burning energy god with an atomic heat god. The Mzungu has decided to bring the sun here on Earth. The research on the fusion atomic heat god has been ongoing for the last 70 years without any concrete result. The fusion atomic heat god is supposed to provide the answer to the energy question of how to run the city without the liquid fire burning energy god. If the Mzungu is successful with the fusion atomic heat god, then the Mzungu will be able to travel to our neighboring star Proxima Centauri and create the first star city, all in the service of the original God of the city here on earth.
War of the City, chapter number 8.
After man has built his magnificent city with beautiful monuments and other valuable artifacts, the other neighboring cities start feeling envious of the neighboring rich city. Therefore, they declare war on that city so that they can have the rich city for themselves. When you look through the history of the Mzungu, you will find that the different civilizations have a tendency to invade each other. The aggressor was always attracted by the prospects of riches and also increasing their influence over the conquered area. Fast forward to the modern world, the global economy has transformed to a different form of invasion between a collection of cities, aka countries. This is because after the Second World War ended, man's world was transformed by all the technology that had been developed during the Second World War. These technologies enabled man to mass produce literally anything at scale. Man therefore thought that they can create a new world order where civilization, aka cities, don't fight each other but trade with each other. This was a form of compromise so that they can clean up their image on the world stage as benefactors of civilization. They therefore decided to experiment with two different economic systems, the capitalist system versus the communist system. These two systems were in competition with each other to see which best controlled their respective populations in their cities. At the end of the competition, the communist system lost due to poor propaganda, which led to poor production and consumption rates in the communist countries. This is what subjected the country to almost 50 years of a Cold War between these two economic systems on how to run the god of the city. In conclusion, the current world trade system is a system in perpetual war. The only difference is the use of trade as a way to exploit the other city and not physical weapons. This is also way less expensive than invading another collection of cities or country and taking their resources by force. The best way is to make sure you profit when dealing with the other city. For example, Britain cannot forcefully come and take Kenya's coffee, rather they control the auction that buys the coffee and therefore control their price, making sure that the global south always remains poor. There is no future in the capitalist system where the exploited will become equal to the exploiter. The system is a perpetual pyramid with Africa at the bottom and the West at the top in the international system.
Conclusion.
Ever since man decided to leave the natural environment and create an artificial one called a city, man's current worldview has significantly changed. The culture and religion of man has also changed with the development of the city. Living in the city is the only way to live now, and there seems to be no other way to live. The city needs more energy, more food, and more of everything. This god of the city is never satisfied. It wants to grow infinitely, and man is willing to sacrifice everything, including our home planet Earth, for the glory of the city. As you have seen from the video, this early civilization that created cities had an impact on the Christian religion. The problems that these Christians were facing were directly linked to their city lifestyle. The problems outlined in the Bible like sick people in the streets of Jerusalem, problems of money in the temple, and Zacchaeus the tax collector have direct mirrors with our current reality. The story of the prodigal son getting lost with the city lifestyle mirrors our current reality of living in a city designed by colonialists. When we usually have such a person who seems to have lost his way in the city after moving into the city from the countryside ama kushago, we usually describe that person as huyo alienda Nairobi akapotea na pombe na wanawake. Living in this colonial city called Nairobi, one can see a direct comparison between Jesus, who was healing the sick people of Jerusalem, with the modern doctors who are paid to provide the healing service. Another modern comparison between Jesus and the modern world is the miracle of feeding 5,000 people with 2 loaves of bread and 5 fish. This is the modern mass production of fish and bread, which you as a person watching this video can perform this miracle provided you have enough money to buy the large amount of fish and bread required to feed those people. It therefore means that in the modern city living, provided you have enough money, you can become like Jesus by buying food for poor people and paying for their basic needs like school fees and medical expenses. This is the act that our modern politicians seem to have mastered by creating a dependency with the poor populace, thereby making themselves more important than they really need to be. So the only reason why the Bible is written like that is because people were already living in a city. If they were living in small villages without the money system and a ruling class, then they would have written the Bible in a different way. But because they were blinded by city living for almost 2 millennia, they ended up writing the Bible as if it applies to all societies, neglecting to include people like our ancestors who only started living in these colonial cities less than 100 years ago. Living in a city detaches people from the natural environment. This detachment from the natural environment creates a situation where your mind is constantly looking for ways to make the city beautiful and clean like that of the colonizer. The lack of playing areas for our children sacrifices the future growth and happiness of our next generation, all in the name of making as much money as possible. In addition, the artificial inequality in wealth creates a high crime rate because of the war of the haves and have-nots. The rapid transport system in the city or between cities, which allows man to cover very long distances in an instant, contributes to a high death rate from pedestrian deaths and other automobile accidents. The urban experience also ends up creating a huge amount of trash. This contributes to lack of clean air and more respiratory diseases caused by polluted air. Waterborne diseases are also prevalent due to lack of clean water or polluted water from industries that produce things to make city living comfortable. A question we should ask ourselves with all the above problems is living in the city really worth it? So, the primary colonizing aka civilizing weapon used by the colonizer is the city. It breaks the social fabric that used to hold our pre-colonial African societies together. It strips us of the means of production for our basic needs. It creates a dependency or a middleman between people and what was freely given by God. The people have to pay for everything in the city: water, firewood, food, and if the colonizer had his way, we would have to pay for the air we breathe. The goal of the colonizer is to create bigger cities around the world, because the bigger the city, the more people are colonized on planet Earth.